The universe, an infinite expanse containing countless mysteries, has always evoked the curiosity of humankind since ancient times. Is its operation a chaotic, random sequence, or does it follow strict rules arranged by an invisible hand? That question, seemingly simple, leads us on a fascinating journey of discovery, where science and spirituality intertwine, where the dry laws of physics blend with the mystical stories of life. We are taught about constants, immutable laws, as self-evident truths that need no proof. Earth, our home, was born as a perfect oasis, with all the most ideal conditions for life to sprout and develop. But where did this astonishing abundance and diversity of life come from? The origin of life, the process of its proliferation, has always been a controversial topic, challenging the intellect of humanity. Did life arise and develop spontaneously, or was there really a creator who shaped the entire natural world that we are exploring? Let us embark on a journey called the Creator of Life, to unveil the mystery of the origin of all species. For thousands of years, since science began to creep into every corner of life, humans have been tirelessly searching for the answer to the origin of life. Some put their faith in the theory of evolution, some turn to religion, others believe in creationism. Amidst countless arguments, one view has been widely recognized by the scientific community and the public around the world, and that is Charles Darwin's theory of evolution. Although refuted in many aspects, no one can deny its enormous contributions to the development of science over the past centuries. So what has made the theory of evolution, despite being controversial, so widely recognized? The theory of evolution is not only recognized by the scientific community, but is also taught as an orthodox scientific theory in many educational systems. And its father, Charles Darwin, an English naturalist, devoted his entire life to pursuing scientific ideals, despite prejudices and difficulties. Let's go back in time to the ship HMS Beagle, crossing the vast Pacific Ocean with the mission of mapping the coast of South America and conducting scientific research. On that ship, there was a special guest, naturalist Charles Darwin. Few people would have guessed that a man of wealthy background would dare to give up the comfortable life in his homeland to find a new ideal for himself. That young man, with a passionate love for nature, used the marvelous pieces collected during his journey around the world to explain all life on this planet. Basically, Darwin's theory of evolution based on natural selection has opened the secret door to the complexity, beauty, subtlety, and diversity of the Earth. For many years, Darwin quietly researched, pieced together evidence, and strived to prove his hypothesis. His research can be considered a new wonder of science, laying the foundation for our understanding of the origin and development of life. Before Darwin, the question of the origin of the diversity of species or their strange distribution had caused endless controversy. Then suddenly, the idea of evolution appeared, like a universal key, explaining all of that. The theory of evolution, a hypothesis that reveals the beauty, the miracle, but also the unexpected cruelty of nature. Of course, not every great idea is immediately supported. The knowledge that Darwin put forth faced fierce criticism in the society of that time. He had to struggle with illness, religious skepticism, and other pains to protect his ideals. But it was his ultimate courage that gave him the confidence to declare that this world was born by natural forces, not by God. Darwin understood the power and importance of this work, a work that could change the whole world. But is Darwin truly worthy of being honored as a great scientist, or just a delusional man with his theory? Darwin's first argument about life was like a fatal blow to the faith of the majority of people at that time. Those who believed in the Creator thought that life was very young and that God had only created life on Earth about 10,000 years ago. So when did life really begin? To answer this question, let's go to Western Australia, which holds the fossil traces that are considered to be the oldest in the world. These fossils are not ordinary rock structures, but they are made up of the fossils of countless dead bacteria. Scientists are certain that these are the remains of the earliest living organisms because their descendants still exist today at stromatolites. But how do we know how old those fossils are? By using the method of measuring the decay over time of a few elements in the specimen, scientists can determine their age with an error of only 1%. The results are astonishing. The specimens in Western Australia are dated to 3.5 billion years old. Thus, life began much longer than the 10,000-year mark that those who believe in the Creator suggest. Darwin was right in his first claim. Next, we need to prove Darwin's second claim. Did life begin with only a few simple living organisms? Over hundreds of millions of years, how did a few simple species evolve into millions of different species? Those who believe in the Creator argue that life does not change over time, as the Creator originally made everything that way. To shed light on this matter, we need a large-scale investigation, and the most suitable place is the museums that house the fossil records of the world. These places contain millions of fossil specimens, revealing life on Earth through different stages of development in history. Thanks to the method of dating by radioactivity, we can know when they lived and in what order they appeared. If Darwin is right, the oldest fossils will be of simple organisms, and over time, the fossil specimens will become more diverse, with more complex organisms appearing. Let's look back at the history of life on Earth. 3.5 billion years ago, the first organisms were found in stromatolites, which is what we found in Western Australia. The world at this time was too simple, almost nothing but bacteria. No other fossil of life has been found with a similar age. Life really did begin with simple things, just as Darwin said. About 3.3 billion years ago, the first single-celled organisms appeared. 2.1 billion years ago, the first cells with nuclei appeared, the type of cell that we see in 99% of organisms today. It was not until 500 million years ago that the first organisms of the Cambrian period appeared, with much more complex characteristics than the primitive life forms. Clearly, life was not created all at once. It has undergone billions of years of development. Darwin's second claim is completely accurate. However, what makes Darwin's work famous and quintessential must lie in the third claim, about how life became diverse and complex through the process of natural selection. So what is natural selection? Natural selection is the process of differential survival and reproduction of different genotypes in a population, thereby leading to the elimination of less adaptive phenotypes while enhancing the survival of adaptive forms, providing opportunities for these adaptive genotypes to contribute to the gene pool of the population in the next generation. To understand it better, let's visit Panama, a small country in Central America. As dawn breaks, the tropical rainforest ecosystem here becomes more vibrant than ever. This is one of the areas with the richest ecosystems in the world. In just a small area of this rainforest, scientists have found 240 species of plants, over 4,000 species of insects, and nearly 50 species of mammals. What created this diversity? Some people think they are the work of the Creator. Darwin argued that they were born from nature. The natural world is actually extremely harsh. Most organisms will die before they can reproduce. However, some individuals will have distinct characteristics that give them a better chance of survival, be it sharper eyes or faster running to escape predators. By any means, they must survive until they reproduce and maintain the lineage. This is the privilege of the survival of the fittest. Over time, small differences in each individual are passed on to the next generation, causing major changes. Darwin argued that after many transformations, they would create a whole new species. This explains why life became complex. According to Darwin, there is another factor that forces species to evolve and adapt, and that is the habitat. Imagine a herd of brown bears deciding to leave their natural home to move to the Arctic. In this snowy environment, a light-colored coat will help them to hunt and hide more easily. The bears with light-colored coats find food more easily. They survive and reproduce more. Eventually, the color of the bear population gradually changes, step by step. The brown bear population becomes polar bears with snow-white fur. This transformation process is Darwin's great and bold idea of natural selection. The theory of evolution has now become a widely accepted standard, an orthodox doctrine that we teach to future generations. And what makes it so supported is probably because we are finding more and more evidence to reinforce it. Do you find this image familiar? These helices were first discovered in 1950 by Watson and Crick. DNA, short for deoxyribonucleic acid, is an extremely important molecule for most organisms. DNA contains genetic material and genes. That's what makes us unique. The development of gene technology is probably the most important contribution to studies related to evolutionary biology since the day Darwin's hypothesis was born. DNA exists in all living organisms, which means that it is possible that all species on Earth evolved from the same ancestor. The above discovery also helps explain why the operation of natural selection accompanied by gene mutations can promote evolution. This process takes place completely automatically without any human intervention. Moreover, we are gradually finding similarities between new species and their ancestors. For example, the structure and morphology of deer, elk, horses, and zebras are relatively similar. It is not surprising to know that they have the same ancestral origin. Similarly, gulls and pelicans share a common origin, so their morphology, habits, and even their DNA are relatively similar. Now, think for a moment. Have you ever had wisdom teeth? That's right, it is one of the remnants of the evolutionary process on our bodies. These characteristics are gradually disappearing during evolution because they are no longer suitable for the current living conditions, even harmful. Just as adaptive characteristics do not appear overnight, unnecessary characteristics also take a lot of time to disappear. Not only wisdom teeth, but also the appendix, the coccyx, and if you need something more convincing, look at this. The ancient genes are clearly shown in the developing embryo and have common characteristics between different species. The early embryos of humans, fish, or some other species all had tails, gills, and some other characteristics. The human embryo has similarities with many other animal species because all species still retain ancient gene codes, the types of genes that originated when the first cell appeared on Earth. This discovery explains why the human embryo has a tail when it is only a few weeks old. Almost all of us have witnessed evolutionary processes taking place in a short time, recording it as valuable documentation. The most typical example is the peppered moth, which evolved due to the Industrial Revolution. Previously, the moth existed in both white and black colors. However, the fact that industrial factories emitted a lot of pollutants made it difficult for the white moths to camouflage. The inevitable consequence was that the black moths increased sharply in number, while the white moths decreased significantly. Another example is bacteria. Currently, there are many types of bacteria that have developed drug resistance, causing doctors to worry about a future where there is no way to fight bacteria. However, to be fair, the theory of evolution still has loopholes that we need to consider. Darwin argued that life appeared a long time ago, but could not explain how it appeared. Louis Pasteur, the famous French scientist, a pioneer in the field of microbiology, declared that life must originate from life. Simply put, offspring must be born from parents. A conscious organism, even the smallest, simplest cell, cannot be created from the random combination of unconscious chemical atoms. This is the biogenesis law, which has been proven experimentally by Pasteur. To demonstrate that the spontaneous generation theory has no scientific basis, the Italian physician Francesco Redi conducted an experiment. he placed a piece of rotting meat in a jar covered with a net. The mesh was so small that flies could not enter the jar to lay eggs on the meat. He observed that there were many maggots on the net, but no maggots on the rotting meat. He concluded that maggots were born from fly eggs and could not arise spontaneously. However, Reedy's experiment did not completely prove that the abiogenesis theory was unscientific. Opponents argued that the mesh was too small to allow air, the life-giving factor, to enter the meat, so maggots could not arise spontaneously. It took another 200 years for the spontaneous generation theory to be completely refuted by Pasteur's experiment. Pasteur conducted the experiment as follows. First, he poured broth into a glass flask with a long neck. Next, he heated the neck to soften it and then bent the neck of the flask like a swan's neck. Then he boiled the broth in the flask to kill bacteria. The air in the flask was pushed out due to the high temperature. He let the flask cool down. When the temperature of the broth returned to normal, the outside air freely entered and exited the flask, but dust, water vapor, and microorganisms outside could not reach the broth but fell down and stuck to the wall of the flask at the bend of the swan's neck. 1 year after the experiment, the broth in the flask was still not spoiled. If the swan's neck was broken, the broth in the flask became contaminated because microorganisms in the air could easily enter. To completely convince the skeptics, Pasteur tilted the swan-necked flask until the broth touched the bend of the neck so that the microorganisms sticking there had the opportunity to move into the broth. As he expected, after a while, the broth was swarming with microorganisms. Thus, if Darwin was right, then the biogenesis law, one of the most fundamental and solid laws of biology, must be wrong. Through the above experiment, you must have known that even the smallest organisms like germs or bacteria cannot spontaneously reproduce in a normal environment. The second doubt about the theory of evolution is the explosion of life forms in the Cambrian period. Before that, most organisms were just simple individuals. But in just 70 to 80 million years, the rate of evolution increased at an astonishing and mysterious speed. Darwin himself noted in his book, The Origin of Species, that the sudden appearance of arthropods in the Cambrian fossils was a puzzle for evolutionary theory. If evolution occurred gradually, little by little, and over an extremely long period of time, but the explosion of life in the Cambrian period completely contradicted that imagination, then what is the truth? Most importantly, people cannot find the intermediate links for the evolution from one species to another. Evolution takes place continuously and gradually, so if species A evolved to become species B, there must be intermediate species between A and B. They are called transitional generations or missing links in the evolutionary chain. However, finding the fossils of these transitional links is harder than finding a needle in a haystack. Darwin himself expressed this concern in his book. The number of transitional varieties which have formerly existed on the Earth must be truly enormous. Why then is not every geological formation and every stratum full of such intermediate links? Geology assuredly does not reveal any such finely graduated organic chain. And this, perhaps, is the most obvious and gravest objection which can be urged against my theory. That is, even in Darwin's time, people were searching for fossils of transitional generations and found nothing. 156 years have passed since the day the book The Descent of Man was published. The effort to find fossils of transitional species is still zero. To make it easier to imagine, look at this. Simply put, we have not found any fossils that have both ape-like and human-like characteristics as shown in the illustration. But the fossils that people use to fill the gap from ape to human are actually 100% extinct species of monkeys or apes, or sometimes 100% human fossils from ancient times. And do you remember the bear population that I mentioned earlier? According to the theory, natural selection leads to beneficial mutations over millions of years, transforming one species into another. But modern science has never witnessed a beneficial mutation. On the contrary, most mutations lead to disease, destroying the organism. Natural selection, an imaginary mechanism, would not be foolish enough to choose harmful mutations. In other words, natural selection does not work, or more precisely, there is no natural selection. Despite enormous efforts in geological excavations all over the Earth, and despite the discovery of many strange animal forms, the huge number of missing links connecting the evolutionary chain has still not been found. The fossil record is almost as discontinuous as when Darwin wrote about the origin of species. He devoted an entire chapter in his book to discuss the lack of fossils of intermediate species. The doubts in the theory of evolution bring us closer to those who believe in the existence of the Creator. Even scientists have begun to talk to each other about the Creator. Discoveries in space science, biology, and philosophy have led many scientists to admit that the universe and life on the planet are part of a grand design. They are perfect, complex, and accurate to an astonishing degree. There must be someone who created and designed the immense perfection of this universe. Physicists calculate that for the universe to exist, gravity and other physical laws that govern our universe need to be adjusted extremely precisely. If not, everything will not be able to exist. For example, if the expansion rate of the universe were just a little weaker, gravity would pull all matter into a big crunch. The great scientist Stephen Hawking once said, "If the rate of expansion 1 second after the Big Bang had been smaller by even 1 part in 100,000 million, the universe would have recollapsed before it ever reached its present size." The story of life still has many things to discuss. It must be admitted that no matter how many questions there are, up to now, Earth is still the only place known to have life. Life exists on Earth basically due to 5 main factors. 1. The distance to the sun is neither too close nor too far, just enough for water to exist in liquid form. 2. The magnetic core protects the atmosphere from the drag of the solar wind and life from cosmic radiation. 3. The atmosphere has a greenhouse effect that prevents water from freezing. 4. There is water as the universal solvent of life. 5. There is oxygen that allows us to breathe. However, unlike a recipe, these factors need to be arranged very reasonably according to a very strict principle. This one does not spoil the other, it can only make the other more perfect. Everything must be in harmony for life to flourish. If the Earth did not have an atmosphere containing oxygen, none of us could breathe, and without oxygen, water could not exist. Without water, there would be no rain for our crops. But that's not all. The size, temperature, relative distance, and chemical composition of our planet, sun and moon, also need to be accurate in every way. And you know, our Earth has a perfect location. This is the reason why humans appeared on Earth and not any other planet in the universe. It is the habitable zone containing water that exists in liquid form, the basic element that forms life. The rotation of the Earth brings the sun up high, shining light down on our planet every morning and lowering the sun to make way for night in the evening. If this rotation stopped, half of the world would be engulfed in fire, the other half would be frozen, and as a result, all living things would be destroyed. The thing that helps living things not be burned under the impact of cosmic rays and solar storms. Perhaps there must be many other biological and weather conditions that need to be precise for life to exist. With the question now being asked, where did all those masterpieces come from? Is it just a very random coincidence of creation? Let's come to the story of 2 brilliant scientists, Isaac Newton and Edmund Halley. Everyone knows Isaac Newton as one of the most outstanding scientists in history and the father of modern physics. The other, the famous astronomer Halley, was a close friend of Newton. He is known for having calculated the trajectory of Halley's comet. Halley was an atheist. One day he visited Newton, saw a model of the solar system made by Newton, and admired it greatly. Halley asked Newton who created this model. Newton replied that no one designed and made this model, it was just that various materials randomly collided with each other to form it. An absurdity suddenly appeared. Halley retorted, "No matter how you argue, someone must have created it. Moreover, that person is a genius." At this time, Newton patted Halley on the shoulder and said, "This model is very sophisticated, but compared to the real solar system, it is really nothing. Even you believe that someone made it, so the solar system, which is hundreds of millions of times more sophisticated than this model, must it not have been created by an omnipotent God using his great wisdom?" Too convincing. From there, we have another scientist who believes in the existence of the Creator. If that huge celestial body is also a masterpiece of God, then what about this tiny human body? The Creator with such extraordinary wisdom, what does he look like? According to the Bible, 2,000 years ago, a man set foot on our planet, a man who claimed to have the answer to life. That is Jesus Christ. 500 years earlier, in the East, two other outstanding figures, Buddha Shakyamuni and Lao Tzu, also descended to earth to enlighten people. The more we ponder ancient religious documents, typically the Bible, the more we realize that it implies that it was God who put the stars in space, fine-tuned our universe, and created us, not Jesus. In Judaism, Jesus is considered a messenger of God, a leader sent by God to save the people of God. The Quran of Islam affirms that Jesus is an important prophet of God, a bringer of the gospel, who can perform miracles but does not possess supreme divine attributes. The Tao Te Ching and Buddhist scriptures also do not say anywhere that Lao Tzu and Buddha created the world. They were contemporaries of Jesus and seem to have also been sent to earth for a certain mission instead of creating the universe. So, who is the Creator? Why have we only heard of him but never known him? In the history of human civilization, there are many records and legends related to the birth of the universe and humankind. We have the legend of the ancient Babylonians about two gods, Lamu and Lahamu, who combined to create humans. The legend of the ancient Indians that gold turned into the sky, silver turned into the earth. Then the story of Pangu separating heaven and earth, Nuwa creating humans in ancient Chinese culture, to the story of Yahweh creating heaven and earth and humans in the Bible. We will probably never know the Creator, just as we can never explain the strange things about life on earth. And then, if we are still determined to find out the truth, is there any clue that can help our small thoughts imagine the most harmonious way in which life began? We need a path that does not deny the theory of evolution, but also does not reject the existence of a Creator. In fact, figuring out how life began on Earth is much harder than filling in the missing chapters in the World History book. This question also leads to other big questions. How rare is life on any planet? What is the probability of life appearing on any planet? Unfortunately, we do not have all the pieces of the story of the origin of life, but we have something to start with, and that is it: water. I'm talking about water, which is something that all life as we know it today needs. Different life forms can survive on extremely different food sources, but no species can live without water. And as you are watching, we have never found out how water covered 2/3 of the world's surface and created the first necessary condition for life. In other words, we have never found the origin of water. Scientists believe that water on Earth was produced by water-rich minerals that melted during the formation of our planet, and that icy comets crashed into Earth billions of years ago and melted. This may or may not be true, but one truth is that we cannot make more water for Earth. We can make a little water in the laboratory, but on a significantly large scale, it is completely impossible. High-cost, dangerous production process, making water for mass use becomes unfeasible. The total amount of water on Earth does not change, but the location of water and the state of water are always changing. This is water in liquid form, this is solid, and of course, the remaining form must be gas. Scientists call the process of water changing states the water cycle. That is when water continuously moves around the world by passing through the air, down to the ground, and out to sea. The water cycle begins when water in the sea, or lakes, rivers, and swamps, evaporates into the atmosphere, that is, into the air around us, in the form of water vapor. You are seeing the result of warm air containing water vapor rising and accumulating. It has grown, turned into a heavy, gray color. When it encounters cold air, the water vapor condenses more and more until it is heavy enough to return to a liquid state and fall to earth as rain. Part of the rainwater evaporates immediately and returns to the atmosphere. The rest falls into the sea, becoming surface water or seeping into the ground to become groundwater. Trees can draw groundwater with their roots and bring water up to their leaves. In the circuit, groundwater runs slowly from the ground to the sea, and the cycle begins again. We drink fresh water, but most of the water on Earth is salt water, and most of the available fresh water on Earth is deep underground, or groundwater. Of those 2 tablespoons of fresh water, nearly 75% is frozen water, the rest is groundwater. The fresh water we see and use from rivers, lakes, and ponds is not even 2 drops of water compared to the entire 1-liter container, which is equivalent to all the water on Earth. The problem is that when the Earth was first formed, it was extremely hot, so the water surrounding the surface of our planet at the beginning would have evaporated immediately. Was water delivered from comets colliding with Earth, or was it brought here by someone? Once water appeared, life probably also appeared at the same time. Therefore, it is possible that life did not start on Earth. For decades, scientists have tried to recreate in the laboratory the conditions of early Earth filled with water, and then we have this experiment, the God experiment. University of Chicago, USA, here in 1952, Stanley Miller and his advisor, Harold Urey, conducted a famous experiment. They created a primitive Earth in a test tube where there was evaporating seawater, inorganic gases simulating the atmosphere, high-power electricity simulating lightning, and cold temperatures to condense into rain clouds. As a result, Miller and Urey demonstrated that simple inorganic precursors under these conditions could combine to create a series of complex organic molecules necessary for life. They are called the process of abiogenesis, and this hypothesis is called the primordial soup, where the field of prebiotic chemistry was born from organic chemistry. The primordial soup hypothesis takes us back to the early 20th century, when 2 scientists, Alexander Oparin and Halden, thought that conditions on early Earth could support the synthesis of complex organic molecules from simple inorganic precursors. First, they supported the birth of amino acids. Then, amino acids became the building blocks of complex polymers, forming proteins and many other biological components. To test this hypothesis, Miller set up an experimental system that simulated the conditions that Oparin and Halden had mentioned. He pumped methane, ammonia, and hydrogen gas inside a 5-liter sterile borosilicate glass flask. This flask was connected to another 500 milliliter flask filled with water. Miller then heated the water, creating steam. This steam entered a larger flask filled with chemicals, creating a miniature primitive atmosphere. In addition, Miller also set up 2 high-frequency electrodes that could discharge to each other to simulate lightning. Then, this entire miniature atmosphere would be cooled, causing the water vapor to condense back into rain. The rainwater was collected as it flowed down a trap tube at the lowest point in the system. After the experiment had been running for a day, Miller saw the solution at the bottom of the flask turn pink. Then a week later, it turned dark red. There had been a big change here. Miller removed the boiling flask, added barium hydroxide and sulfuric acid to stop the reaction. Then he evaporated the solution to remove impurities and examined what remained through paper chromatography. As a result, Miller found 5 amino acids out of a total of 20 amino acids that make up all life on Earth. Subsequent repeated experiments even discovered more types of amino acids. The Miller-Urey experiment shook the scientific world, sparking endless debates. Many people began to believe that life could arise spontaneously from inorganic matter under the right conditions, an idea that was previously considered unthinkable. The ideas of a primordial soup gave new hope to those who were trying to understand how life began. However, there is another big problem that we have not mentioned. All life today is made up of cells. Cells all have an outer shell, which is the cell membrane, a boundary between life and the rest of the world. Our cells are miniature factories, complete with switches, tiny assembly lines, and especially, they have the ability to replicate themselves. That is an incredible ability, and also something that no inorganic chemical can do. Some scientists believe that the cell membrane must have formed before cells could replicate themselves. Experiments show that some fatty acids can spontaneously form double-layered bubbles, similar to cell membranes. Perhaps in the primordial soup, amino acids bonded together, forming simple proteins. Then they were enclosed by these bubbles and became the first living cells. However, there is still a huge gap between fatty acid bubbles and a real living cell. Living cells have an extremely complex structure with thousands of types of proteins, nucleic acids, and other molecules, arranged in a precise and sophisticated way. How could simple fatty acid bubbles automatically develop into such complex structures? This question is still a big mystery for scientists. However, recent discoveries of extraterrestrial life make the picture of the origin of life even more complex. The remarkable development of space science has brought about shocking discoveries, shaking previous conceptions of life. Scientists have found organic compounds, even amino acids, on meteorites, comets, and in dust clouds in space. This shows that the basic components of life may exist commonly in the universe, not just on Earth. These findings raise an interesting question. Were the seeds of life sown throughout the universe, and Earth is just one of many places where life sprouted and developed? Possibly, during its 4.5 billion-year history, Earth has suffered countless collisions with meteorites carrying organic compounds, even amino acids. These collisions may have provided more ingredients for the primordial soup, promoting the evolution of life. Scientists have found a meteorite that fell to Earth containing up to 80 types of amino acids, far more than the 20 types of amino acids that make up human proteins. The extremely strong impacts may have dispersed these materials throughout the planet, creating chemical reactions similar to Miller and Urey's experiment. It can be imagined that those collisions were almost like times when creation sprinkled more spices into the boiling primordial soup, which was the last step to complete the masterpiece called life. It seems that the above experiments increasingly strongly support Darwin's theory of evolution, but I know that this controversy will continue for a long time. Newton wrote, "I do not know what I may appear to the world, but to myself I seem to have been only like a boy playing on the seashore and diverting myself in now and then, finding a smoother pebble or a prettier shell than ordinary, whilst the great ocean of truth lay all undiscovered before me." Einstein also said, "I want to know how God created this world. I am not interested in this or that phenomenon, in the spectrum of this or that element. I want to know his thoughts. The rest are details. I see a pattern, but my imagination cannot picture the maker of that pattern. I see a clock, but I cannot envision the clockmaker. The human mind is unable to conceive of the 4 dimensions, so how can it conceive of a God before whom 1,000 years and 1,000 dimensions are as one?" Today, the resurgence of the anthropic principle makes the question of the origin of everything even more diverse and fascinating. The seemingly unintentional arrangements that are incredibly perfect. Is everything natural or from the Creator? Then the debate between science and spirituality also becomes stronger. What do you think about the origin of life? Are the incredible perfections that we discover programmed, arranged by a greater power outside? The most convincing answer is probably always the perception of each individual. Thank you for your interest in Nobrain. We will see you again in the following videos. Please leave your comments below. And now, goodbye and see you again.